The difference between a hero and a nobody is often just a uniform. In the sterile, chaotic hallways of Chicago's Mercy General Hospital, Arthur Banks was invisible, a man who scrubbed the floors while arrogant doctors walked right over him. They saw a janitor. They didn't see the man who had once stitched soldiers back together in the dust of the Coringal Valley. They didn't know that the hands holding the mop had saved more lives than the entire surgical department combined. But when a young soldier's heart stopped and the lead surgeon froze, the janitor dropped his bucket. What happened in the next 3 minutes didn't just break hospital protocol. It broke the entire medical community and revealed a secret the government had tried to bury. This is the story of the surgeon who hid in plain sight. The smell of Mercy General wasn't antiseptic. If you worked there long enough, past the 12-hour shifts that turned into 14, you realized the real smell was a cocktail of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and fear. Susanna Horton adjusted her ponytail, wincing as the elastic pulled at her scalp. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the graveyard shift in every sense of the word. The ER was currently in a lull, the deceptive quiet that usually preceded a storm. She leaned against the nurse's station, watching the rhythmic back-and-forth motion of a mop down the hallway. Arthur Banks moved with a specific economy of motion. He was a man of indeterminate age, perhaps late 50s, with graying stubble that looked like steel wool and eyes that were always lowered. He wore the standard-issue navy blue jumpsuit of the custodial staff, a size too big, swallowing a frame that was surprisingly wiry. To the staff of Mercy General, Arthur was barely a footnote. He was the guy you called when a drunk threw up in the waiting room, or when a trauma bay looked like a slaughterhouse after a pile-up on I-90. He didn't speak much, just a nod, a yes ma'am, and the sound of his bucket wheels squeaking against the linoleum. "Arthur," Susanna called out softly. "You missed a spot near bed 6. Arthur paused. He didn't look at the floor. He looked at the patient in bed 6, an elderly woman wheezing in her sleep. He stared at her for a fraction of a second too long before dipping his mop into the grey water. "Got it, Miss Horton," Arthur rasped. His voice sounded like gravel crunching under tires. Just then, the double doors of the trauma wing swung open. Dr. Preston Walsh strode in, flanked by 2 residents who looked terrified. Walsh was the kind of surgeon who thought God had created the universe just so he'd have a place to practice medicine. He was brilliant, undeniably, but he wielded his intellect like a cudgel. "Why is the floor still wet in Bay 3? Walsh barked, not looking at anyone in particular, which meant he was yelling at everyone. "I have a scheduled consultation in 10 minutes. If I slip, I sue. It's that simple." Susanna stiffened. "Janitorial is short-staffed, Doctor. Arthur is doing his best." Walsh stopped and looked down at Arthur, who was currently wringing out the mop head. The doctor's lip curled. "Arthur, right. The man with the PhD in bleach. Move faster, Arthur. Some of us are actually saving lives here." Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't tighten his grip on the mop handle. He simply moved to the side, his eyes fixed on the floor tiles. "Yes, Doctor." Walsh stormed off, his entourage scrambling to keep up. Susanna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding and walked over to Arthur. "I'm sorry about him," she whispered. "He's been on a tear since the board meeting yesterday." Arthur looked up, and for a fleeting moment, Susanna saw something that chilled her. It wasn't anger. It was an intense, clinical assessment. He wasn't looking at her. He was scanning her pupils, her complexion, the tremor in her hand. "He's dehydrated," Arthur said quietly. "And his left shoe lift is worn down. Creates a gait imbalance. Makes him irritable." Susanna blinked. "What?" "The floor is dry, Miss Horton," Arthur said, his voice returning to its submissive low register. He turned the bucket around and pushed it toward the utility closet. Susanna watched him go, a strange feeling settling in her stomach. It wasn't the first time Arthur had said something odd. 2 months ago, he had moved a crash cart closer to a patient's room 10 minutes before the patient went into unexpected cardiac arrest. When asked, he claimed he just needed to clean behind it. Last week, she found him reading a discarded copy of the New England Journal of Medicine in the break room trash, his lips moving silently as he critiqued a diagram on vascular reconstruction. She shook her head. "You're imagining things, Susanna. He's a janitor, a lonely guy who watches too much Grey's Anatomy." She went back to her charts, unaware that the lull was over. The radio on the desk crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice high and urgent. "Mercy General. This is unexpected transport. We have a military convoy intercept, one high-priority trauma. Gunshot wound to the chest, blunt force trauma from vehicle rollover. Vitals unstable. ETA 3 minutes. Susanna grabbed the receiver. "Copy that. We are activating the trauma team." She hit the red button on the wall. The alarms blared. In the utility closet, Arthur Banks stood in the dark. He heard the specific code Trauma 1, military admit. His hand, holding a spray bottle, began to tremble, not from fear, but from a muscle memory he had spent 15 years trying to drown in cheap whiskey and floor wax. He closed his eyes and saw the sand. He smelled the burning diesel. He felt the warm, sticky slickness of blood that wasn't his own. "Don't go out there, Artie," he told himself. "You're a ghost. Stay dead." But then he heard the sirens. They weren't the standard city ambulance wails. These were deeper, throaty, urgent. Arthur kicked the door open, grabbed his mop bucket, and pushed it out into the hallway. If there was blood, someone had to clean it up. That was his excuse. That was always his excuse. The ER exploded into controlled chaos. Nurses were ripping open sterile packs, and the overhead lights in Trauma Bay 1 were cranked to maximum brightness, washing the room in a harsh, unforgiving white glare. Dr. Walsh was already snapping on latex gloves, his face a mask of annoyance rather than concern. "Military transport! Why aren't they going to the VA? We're not a field hospital. VA is diverted due to a power failure." Susanna snapped back, priming an IV line. "Patient is a 22-year-old male, private first class, name is Michael O'Connor." The double doors burst open. 2 paramedics, flanked by a rigid, uniformed military officer, wheeled the gurney in. The soldier on the bed was shockingly young, his face pale and covered in a sheen of sweat and grease. His uniform was cut open, revealing a chest that was a map of violence. "Talk to me," Walsh commanded. Single G's well to the left thorax barely missed the vest. The paramedic shouted over the noise. Vehicle rolled after the shot. "He's got multiple rib fractures. BP is 80/50 and dropping. Heart rate 130. Breath sounds absent on the left. Tension pneumothorax," Walsh declared instantly. "Breath sounds absent on the left. Tension pneumothorax," Walsh declared instantly. "Get me a chest tube tray." 36 French. Move. Arthur Banks was standing in the corner, ostensibly waiting to mop up the muddy footprints the paramedics had tracked in. But his eyes were locked on the monitor, then on the patient's neck. He saw the jugular veins distended. He saw the way the soldier's chest wasn't just not moving on the left. It was paradoxical. But something else was wrong. The numbers on the monitor didn't match a simple pneumothorax. The pulse pressure was narrowing. 80/50, 75/55. It's not just the lung, Arthur thought, his grip on the mop handle turning white. "Look at the EKG, you arrogant prick. Look at the electrical ordnance. Tube is in," Walsh shouted, shoving the plastic trocar into the soldier's ribs. A hiss of air escaped, and blood splattered onto the floor. "Good flow," a resident said. "BP should stabilize." Susanna watched the monitor. "Dr. Walsh, BP is not stabilizing, it's dropping. 70/40. Walsh frowned. "Fluids. He's hypovolemic. Hang 2 units of Oneg pressure bag, wide open." "Doctor," Susanna said, her voice rising, his heart tones muffled. "I can barely hear them." "He's got a chest full of blood, of course they're muffled." Walsh snapped. "Stop playing doctor, Nurse Horton, and squeeze the bag." Arthur took a step forward. He shouldn't. He knew he shouldn't. Every step toward that table was a felony. Every word he spoke could send him to prison, or worse, back to the shadowy government facility he had fled from. But he looked at the boy. Michael O'Connor. High and tight haircut. A tattoo of a cross on his forearm. He looked exactly like him, like the boy Arthur hadn't been able to save in Fallujah. Arthur nudged the mop bucket forward, intentionally bumping into the instrument tray stand. It rattled loudly. "Hey! Watch it!" Walsh screamed, spinning around. "Get the hell out of here, Arthur!" Beck's triad, Arthur mumbled, his head down, scrubbing a spot of blood on the floor near Walsh's feet. "What did you say?" Walsh asked, stunned by the audacity. Arthur looked up. For the first time in 3 years, he made direct eye contact with Dr. Preston Walsh. The submissive janitor was gone. The eyes that stared back were hard, cold, and infinitely more experienced than the man holding the scalpel. "Beck's triad," Arthur said, his voice clear and authoritative. "Distended neck veins, muffled heart sounds, hypotension. The chest tube didn't fix it because the problem isn't the lung anymore. It's the heart." The room went silent. The beeping of the monitor seemed to get louder. "Excuse me," Walsh scoffed, a laugh of disbelief bubbling up. "The janitor is giving a differential diagnosis. Get security. Now, he has cardiac tamponade," Arthur said, ignoring the threat. He pointed a calloused finger at the soldier. "The bullet grazed the pericardium or a rib fragment nicked it. The sac is filling with blood. You're drowning his heart. If you push more fluids, you'll increase the pressure and kill him in 60 seconds. Security!" Walsh roared, his face turning purple. "Doctor, look at the monitor!" Susanna screamed. Everyone turned. The jagged line of the EKG had changed. It wasn't just fast anymore. It was undulating, the height of the waves varying with every beat. "Electrical alternans," the resident whispered. "The heart is swinging in the fluid." "He's coding," Susanna yelled. "Fiv!" The alarms screamed. The flatline tone began to warble. "Paddle!" Walsh yelled, panic finally cracking his voice. "Charge to 200! "No!" Arthur shouted. He dropped the mop. It clattered to the floor with a sound like a gavel strike. "You can't shock a tamponade. The heart has no room to pump. You have to drain it. Clear!" Walsh yelled, ignoring him, slamming the paddles onto the boy's chest. The body jolted. The monitor didn't change. Again, 300. "You're killing him," Arthur roared. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. His posture had shifted. He moved with the predatory grace of a combat surgeon. He stepped over the mop bucket. "Get him out of here!" Walsh screamed at the military officer standing by the door. The officer moved to intercept Arthur, but Arthur didn't stop. "Officer, if that boy dies, it's on you. He needs a pericardiocentesis. Now." The officer hesitated. He saw something in Arthur's eyes, a command presence that outranked everyone in the room. "Charge to 360, Walsh yelled, sweating profusely. Arthur didn't wait. He didn't go for the doctor. He went. He didn't go for the doctor. He went for the instrument tray. His hand moved so fast it was a blur. He snatched a 18-gauge spinal needle and a 50cc syringe. "Restrain him," Walsh shrieked. 2 orderlies grabbed Arthur's arms. He twisted, using a judo leverage move that sent the larger orderly crashing into the crash cart. He shoved the second one back. "Don't touch me," Arthur growled. He reached the bedside. Walsh raised the paddles as if to use them as a weapon. "Get back, you lunatic." "Move, Preston," Arthur said. He didn't use the title. He used the name, or you explained to his mother why you cooked her son's heart instead of draining it. Time seemed to suspend. The soldier was turning blue. The monitor was a flat whine. Arthur looked at Susanna. Betadine, subxyphoid, now. Susanna didn't think. Her body reacted to the authority in the voice. She splashed the brown liquid onto the soldier's chest, just below the sternum. Arthur didn't hesitate. He didn't look for an ultrasound machine to guide him. He didn't ask for a sterile drape. He placed his left hand on the soldier's chest. Feeling for the anatomical landmarks, the xiphoid process, the costal margin, he visualized the anatomy, a 3D map in his mind that he had navigated 1,000 times in the dark, in the mud, under fire. He angled the needle 45 degrees toward the left shoulder. "Stop him," Walsh screamed. Arthur thrust the needle in. The silence in Trauma Bay 1 was absolute. A vacuum created by shock. The only sound was the high-pitched whine of the flatline monitor, a singular note announcing death. Arthur Banks felt the resistance of the skin, then the tougher, fibrous layer of the rectus sheath. He didn't look at the screaming doctor or the terrified nurse. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, tuning into the tactile feedback traveling up the stainless steel needle. Too shallow, you hit the sternum. Too deep, you puncture the right ventricle and kill him instantly. He advanced the needle another millimeter. Pop. It was a sensation only a surgeon would know, the subtle release of tension as the needle tip pierced the tough pericardial sac and entered the fluid-filled space around the heart. To Arthur, it felt like breaking the surface of water. He pulled back on the plunger. "He's crazy. Get the police." Walsh was shrieking, lunging forward to grab Arthur's wrist. "Don't touch it," Arthur snarled, his voice dropping to a command octave that froze Walsh mid-step. Dark, non-clotted blood swirled into the syringe. It was the color of old wine. "Look at the syringe," Susanna whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Arthur drew back 20 cc, then 40 cc. The flatline tone on the monitor wavered. Then it stopped. Beep! A ragged, chaotic wave appeared on the green screen. Beep! Beep! Sinus rhythm. The resident gasped. "We have a rhythm. Rate is 110. Arthur didn't celebrate. He kept his hand steady, anchoring the needle against the soldier's chest wall with his pinky finger to prevent it from shearing the heart muscle as it began to beat again. "BP is coming up," Susanna called out, her voice trembling with adrenaline. 90 over 60. 100 over 70. Oxygen saturation rising. The soldier, Michael O'Connor, gasped. It was a terrible, wet sound, like a drowning man breaking the surface, but it was the sound of life. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and panicked. "Easy, son," Arthur said softly, his tone shifting instantly from command to comfort. "You're back. You're in Chicago. Just breathe." Dr. Walsh stood frozen, his mouth slightly open. The paddles were still in his hands, dripping with conductive gel. He looked from the monitor to the syringe full of blood in the janitor's hand, his mind unable to process the impossibility of what just happened. A man who emptied trash cans had just performed a blind pedicardiocentesis procedure Walsh himself would have hesitated to do without ultrasound guidance, and he had done it perfectly. But shock quickly turned to humiliation, and humiliation, for a man like Preston Walsh, always turned to rage. The double doors swung open again. This time it wasn't a gurney. It was hospital security. 3 large men in tactical vests, led by the head of security, Frank Miller. "What is going on?" Miller barked. Walsh snapped out of his trance. He dropped the paddles and pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "Assault!" Walsh yelled. "That man assaulted me. He assaulted the staff. He stabbed a patient with a dirty needle. Arrest him." Arthur carefully withdrew the needle from the soldier's chest. He placed a piece of gauze over the puncture site and looked at Susanna. "Hold pressure here for 5 minutes," Arthur said calmly. "He needs the ore, thoracotomy to repair the pericardium, but he's stable for transport. Get on the ground," Miller shouted, reaching for his taser. "Drop the weapon." Arthur placed the bloody syringe on the metal tray. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't argue. He simply took a step back, picked up a rag from his cleaning cart, and wiped his hands. "I said, on the ground." Miller lunged, tackling Arthur. Arthur didn't fight back. He knew how to break Miller's arm in 3 places before the man hit the floor. He knew how to incapacitate the other 2 guards in under 4 seconds. But Arthur Banks was tired. He let the heavy weight of the guards slam him into the hard linoleum, his face pressed against the cold floor, the same floor he had waxed 6 hours ago. He saw the dust bunnies under the gurney wheel. You have the right to remain silent, Miller shouted, twisting Arthur's arm behind his back and ratcheting the handcuffs tight. Susanna screamed, "Stop! He saved him! Dr. Walsh, tell them! He saved the boy!" Walsh straightened his white coat, regaining his composure. He looked down at Arthur, who was being hauled to his feet by the guards. "He practiced medicine without a license," Walsh said coldly. "He endangered a patient's life. He attacked a furious attending physician. Get him out of my trauma bay." As they dragged Arthur away, he didn't look at the doctor. He looked at the soldier. Michael O'Connor was breathing. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Arthur met the soldier's gaze for a fleeting second. The boy didn't know who this man in the dirty blue jumpsuit was, but he nodded weakly. That was enough. "Take him to the holding room," Miller ordered. "Call the Chicago PD." Arthur walked out, head bowed, the wheels of his mop bucket left spinning in the middle of the room. The hospital holding room was a windowless box designed for drunk patients and combative psychiatric cases. It smelled of mildew and despair. Arthur sat on the metal bench, his hands cuffed to the bar bolted to the wall. He closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the cinder block. He knew the clock was ticking. Not for the police. He wasn't worried about the Chicago PD. He was worried about the fingerprints. Once they ran his prints, the quiet life of Arthur Banks would evaporate. The name Arthur Banks belonged to a man who had died in 1998 in a car accident in Ohio. The man sitting in the holding room was a ghost. The door buzzed and opened. It wasn't the police, it was Susanna Horton. She looked frazzled, her scrubs stained with betadine and blood. She held a plastic cup of water. "You can't be in here," the guard outside said. "I'm checking his vitals," Susanna lied smoothly. "Dr. Walsh's orders. Liability check before the police take in." The guard grunted and closed the door. Susanna rushed over, holding the cup to Arthur's lips. He drank greedily. "Thank you," he rasped. "Thank you," he rasped. "Who are you?" Susanna asked, her voice shaking. She pulled a chair over and sat opposite him. "I watched you, Arthur. You didn't just get lucky. You knew exactly where the internal mammary artery was. You knew the angle. You knew the pressure dynamics." Arthur looked at his hands. "I'm the janitor, Susanna. Stop it," she hissed. "I've been a trauma nurse for 10 years. I've seen residents shake like leaves trying to find a vein. You wielded that needle like it was an extension of your own finger. Dr. Walsh is writing a statement right now that will put you in prison for 20 years. Attempted murder, assault, practicing without a license. You have to tell me the truth so I can help you." Arthur sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "You can't help me, Susanna. You should go back to work, before Walsh fires you too." "The soldier is alive," she said fiercely. They took him to surgery. The cardiothoracic surgeon, Dr. Evans? He came down. He asked who did the tap. He said it was the cleanest puncture he's ever seen. He said whoever did it saved the kid's life. Arthur offered a faint, sad smile. "Good, that's all that matters. Why won't you fight this?" "Because fighting brings attention," Arthur whispered. "And attention is dangerous." Before Susanna could press him, the door opened again. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Dr. Walsh entered, looking smug, but he wasn't alone. Behind him walked a man who sucked the oxygen out of the room. He was wearing army fatigues, the rank of colonel pinned to his collar. He was tall, with a shaved head and a scar running through his left eyebrow. Colonel James Rhodes. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew Rhodes, not personally but by reputation. Rhodes was Joint Special Operations Command. If he was here, it was for the soldier. "This is the man," Ward said, gesturing to Arthur like he was a zoo exhibit. "We found him with the weapon. He's clearly disturbed. I want to press full charges." Colonel Rhodes didn't look at Walsh. He stared at Arthur. He studied the way Arthur sat, shoulders relaxed, eyes scanning the room, feet planted flat. He looked at the calluses on Arthur's hands. "Leave us," Rhodes said. His voice was quiet, but it wasn't a request. Excuse me. Walsh bristled. This is my hospital. I have to wait for the police. Doctor. Rhodes turned, his eyes like flint. Private O'Connor is a high-value asset belonging to the United States Army. This is now a matter of national security. You will leave, or I will have my MPs escort you out. Walsh opened his mouth, closed it, turned red, and stormed out. Susanna hesitated. You too, nurse, Rhodes said, softer this time. Susanna looked at Arthur. Arthur gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. It's okay. She left, the heavy door clicking shut. Arthur and the colonel were alone. Rhodes walked around the metal bench. He didn't speak for a long time. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes, realized he was in a hospital, and put them back. Dr. Evans told me about the procedure, Rhodes said. Blind subxiphoid pericardiocentesis on a moving target, with a spinal needle. Arthur said nothing. There are maybe 50 people in the country who could pull that off without killing the kid. Rhodes continued. Most of them are working in top-tier university hospitals. They drive Porsches. They don't mop floors in Chicago. Arthur stared at the wall. I read a lot. Rhodes chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. Right, you read a lot. Let me tell you what I see. I see a man who didn't flinch when security burst in. I see a man who knows how to sit in a restraint chair to minimize joint strain. And I see a man who tied a square knot on the gauze tape with one hand, a surgical knot. Rhodes leaned in close. We ran your prints, Arthur. You know what came back? Arthur held his breath. Nothing, Rhodes said. No criminal record, no birth certificate, no social security history prior to 3 years ago. You're a ghost. Rhodes paused, his eyes narrowing, but then I ran them through the DoD database. The secure one. The one that requires a retinal scan to access. Arthur closed his eyes. Access denied, Rhodes said. That's what it said. Not no match. It said access denied, level 5 clearance required. That means your file exists, but it's buried so deep that even a colonel in special ops can't touch it. Rhodes stood up straight. Who are you? And don't tell me you're a janitor. Because janitors don't have level 5 classified files. Arthur looked up. The charade was over. The gray man was dissolving. If you access that file, Colonel, Arthur said, his voice changing. The gravelly rasp of the smoker was gone, replaced by a refined, educated baritone that spoke of Ivy League schools and officer candidate school. You will trigger a silent alarm at the Pentagon. Within 10 minutes, a black helicopter will be landing on the roof of this hospital, and neither of us will be walking out of here. Rhodes stiffened. My name, Arthur said slowly, is not Arthur Banks. And that boy in the OR? I didn't save him because I read a book. I saved him because I wrote the manual on field trauma surgery for the 75th Ranger Regiment. Rude's eyes widened. You're him. You're the surgeon of the valley. I was, Arthur corrected. Now, I'm just the guy who cleans the toilets, and if you want to keep your career, Colonel, you'll let the police take me for assault, because if the people looking for me find out I'm here, this hospital turns into a war zone. Rhodes looked at the handcuffed man. He saw the wariness in the eyes, but also the undeniable steel. The surgeon of the valley died 4 years ago. Rhodes whispered. Helicopter crash in the Hindu Kush. No survivors. Bodies burned beyond recognition. Convenient, wasn't it? Arthur replied. Perfect way to disappear after you refuse an order to let a village die to catch a warlord. Rhodes took a step back. He was standing on the edge of a conspiracy that was clearly massive. Why risk it? Rhodes asked. Why blow your cover for a private you don't even know? Arthur looked down at his hands, the hands that had killed and cured in equal measure, because he was dying. Arthur said simply, and I took an oath. Primum non nocere, first do no harm. Watching him die when I could save him, that would have been the harm. Suddenly the door banged open. That would have been the harm. Suddenly, the door banged open. But it wasn't Walsh. It was Susanna. She was breathless, her face pale. "They're coming," she gasped. "Arthur, the police are here. But there are others. Suits, earpieces. They're arguing with the front desk. They're asking for the subject." Arthur stood up, straining against the cuffs. "They found the print ping. They're here." Rhodes looked at Arthur, then at Susanna, then at the door. He had a split-second decision to make. He could follow protocol, hand Arthur over, and wash his hands of it. Or he could trust the legend of the man who had supposedly died a hero. Rhodes reached into his pocket and pulled out a universal handcuff key. "Nurse," Rhodes barked. "Does this room have a back exit?" "Maintenance chase," Susanna said. "Behind that panel." Rhodes unlocked the cuffs. "Dr. Walsh is going to be very disappointed when his prisoner escapes." Arthur rubbed his wrists. He looked at Rhodes. "You're making a mistake, Colonel." "Probably," Rhodes grinned, a wolfish expression. "But I owe the Rangers a favor. Get out of here. I'll buy you 5 minutes." "I'm coming with you," Susanna said, grabbing Arthur's arm. "No," Arthur said firmly. "It's too dangerous. You don't know the hospital layout like I do," she countered. "You'll be trapped in the basement in 2 minutes without me. Besides, I just slapped Dr. Walsh. I'm pretty sure I'm fired anyway." Arthur looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the same fire he used to see in the medics he trained. "Move," Arthur said. He kicked the maintenance panel open. Darkness swallowed them just as the heavy boots of the hit team echoed down the hallway. The maintenance chase was a throat of concrete and pipe, barely 3 feet wide, smelling of rust and superheated steam. It was a world away from the sterile white hallways above, a dark artery that fed the hospital its heat and water. Susanna Horton scrambled over a bundle of fiber-optic cables, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The flashlight on her phone cut a erratic beam through the darkness. "Slow down!" Arthur's voice came from behind her. It wasn't the raspy whisper of the janitor anymore. It was calm, leveled, and devoid of fear. "Slow down," Susanna hissed, spinning around, nearly banging her head on a low-hanging duct. "They have guns, Arthur. Real guns with silencers. I saw the bulge in that man's jacket. Who are they?" Arthur stopped. In the dim light of her phone, his face was smeared with grease, but his eyes were scanning the junction of pipes above them. "They're cleaners," Arthur said, as if identifying a species of bird. "Department of Defense contractors. Private sector. When the government makes a mess that can't be on the books, they call these guys to sanitize the site." "Sanitize." Susanna felt a cold knot in her stomach. "You mean kill people?" "I mean erase everything. Witnesses, evidence, and the source of the leak." Arthur looked at her. "That's me. I'm the leak. You said you died in a helicopter crash." "Major John Galloway died in a crash," Arthur corrected. "I switched dog tags with the pilot. He was already gone. I dragged myself out of the burning fuselage and walked 40 miles through the mountains with a shattered femur and third-degree burns. I've been dead for 4 years. Until tonight." Susanna stared at him. The grey-haired man who mopped up vomit and fixed wobbling tables was a ghost of a war hero, a man who had amputated his own past to survive. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed through the pipes. It came from the access hatch they had just come through. "They're in the vents," Arthur whispered. "Turn off the light." Susanna thumbed her phone screen. Darkness swallowed them instantly. The only sound was the hissing of the steam valves and the distant thrum of the hospital's massive generators. "Take my hand," Arthur commanded softly. "Count your steps. 30 paces, turn left. There's a junction box. We need to get to the laundry intake." They moved like specters. Arthur navigated the pitch-black tunnel with terrifying ease. He knew every inch of this hospital not because he was a surgeon, but because he was the janitor. He knew which floor tiles squeaked, which doors locked from the inside, and which ventilation shafts led to the roof. He had spent 3 years mapping his cage. They reached the laundry chute vertical drop into the sub-basement where the industrial washers lived. "We have to jump," Arthur said. "Are you crazy? It's 3 stories down. There's a pile of linen carts at the bottom. It's the only way to bypass the elevators. They'll have the elevators locked down." Before Susanna could protest, the tunnel behind them lit up with the searing white beam of a tactical flashlight. "Contact!" A distorted voice shouted. "Target is in the north chase. Free to engage." "Put foot!" 2 bullets struck the pipe next to Susanna's head, sparking wildly and hissing as they punctured a steam line. A jet of scalding vapor erupted between them and the shooters. "Go!" Arthur shoved her. Susanna screamed and slid into the metal chute. She tumbled through the darkness, the smell of dirty sheets filling her nose, before landing with a soft whump into a mountain of blue surgical scrubs. Arthur landed a second later, rolling perfectly to absorb the impact. He was up instantly, pulling her out of the cart. They were in the massive industrial laundry room. Rows of washing machines the size of sedans churned rhythmically. The noise was deafening, a perfect cover. "We need to get out of the building," Susanna yelled over the roar of the machines. "The loading dock is through those double doors." Arthur didn't move toward the doors. He stopped. He was looking at a digital monitor mounted on the wall which displayed the hospital's active surgery statuses. OR3 O'Connor, N recovery, IC recovery, ICU transfer pending. Arthur froze. "Arthur." Susanna grabbed his sleeve. "The loading dock. They aren't just here for me, Susanna," Arthur said, his voice dropping. "Rhodes said the boy is a high-value asset. If these contractors are scrubbing the site, they can't leave a witness. He's a soldier. They wouldn't kill one of their own." "They aren't military," Arthur said grimly. "They're corporate. And if that boy saw something he wasn't supposed to, if that's why his convoy was hit, they will finish the job in the ICU. They make it look like a post-surgical complication. An embolism. A cardiac arrest." He looked at the exit, then back at the service elevator. "You go," Arthur said. "Go to the police station. Tell them everything. Where are you going?" Arthur walked over to a shelf of cleaning supplies. He grabbed 2 bottles of industrial ammonia and a bottle of bleach. He didn't look back. "I have to go check on my patient." The intensive care unit on the 4th floor was quiet, bathed in the soft, rhythmic blue light of monitors. It was the witching hour, that deep part of the night where life and death held their most intimate conversations. Dr. Walsh was at the nurse's station, berating a resident about a missing chart, trying to regain the sense of control he had lost in the trauma bay. He felt small and he hated it. "I don't care what the computer says. I want that chart physically in my hand." Walsh snapped. The elevator doors at the end of the hall pinged. Walsh turned, expecting the police to return with his janitor so he could press charges. Instead, 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They moved with a synchronized fluidity that was unsettling. One carried a briefcase. The other held a folded newspaper that concealed the silhouette of a suppressed subcompact machine gun. "Can I help you?" Walsh asked, stepping out from the desk. "Visiting hours are over." The lead man, blond with cold, shark-like eyes, ignored him. He walked straight toward the nurse at the desk. "Private Michael O'Connor," the man said. "Room number." I can't give out patient information," the nurse stammered. The man produced a badge. It looked official, Homeland Security. "Room number, now. National security matter. Room number, now. National security matter. Room 404. Walsh interjected, stepping forward, eager to be part of the important crowd. "I'm the attending physician. Dr. Preston Walsh. Is there a problem with the prisoner?" The blond man looked at Walsh with utter indifference. "Step aside, doctor. We are transferring the patient." "Transferring? He's 1 hour post-op from a pericardial window. You can't move him." "We can, and we will." The man signaled his partner. They moved toward room 404. Walsh, for all his arrogance, was territorial. Now listen here. You don't just walk into my ICU and take a critical patient without paperwork. I'm calling the chief of medicine." Walsh reached for the phone. The second man in the suit turned, raising the newspaper. "Foot." The phone shattered in Walsh's hand. Plastic shards flew into his face. Walsh stared at the receiver, then at the hole in the desk, his mind unable to comprehend that he had just been shot at. "Next one goes in your knee," the man said calmly. "Sit down," quietly. The entire nursing staff froze. The ICU had just become a hostage situation. The blond man pushed open the door to room 404. Inside, the soldier, Michael O'Connor, was asleep, intubated, his chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator. The assassin opened his briefcase. He didn't take out a gun. He took out a syringe and a vial of potassium chloride. Simple, untraceable in an autopsy if not looked for specifically. It would look like sudden cardiac arrest. He tapped the syringe. "Hey!" The voice came from the ceiling. The assassin looked up just as the ventilation grate above the patient's bed kicked open. Arthur Banks dropped from the ceiling. He didn't land like a superhero. He landed like a sack of bricks, right on top of the assassin. They crashed to the floor, the syringe skittering across the tiles. The assassin was strong, trained in Krav Maga. But Arthur was fighting with the desperate fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. Arthur headbutted the man, the sound of cartilage cracking echoing in the small room. The assassin roared and threw Arthur off, drawing a tactical knife from his belt. He lunged. Arthur sidestepped, grabbing the IV pole next to the bed. He swung it like a bow staff. The heavy metal base cracked against the assassin's wrist, sending the knife flying. "Security!" Walsh was screaming in the hallway. "Help!" The second gunman in the hallway turned toward the room, raising his weapon. "Clear the hall," Arthur shouted. He kicked the door shut just as bullets threaded the wood, punching holes through the glass observation window. "Who are you?" The assassin on the floor groaned, spitting blood. Arthur stood over him, breathing hard. He picked up the fallen syringe of potassium. "I'm the janitor," Arthur said. He grabbed the assassin by the collar and hurled him through the glass window, out into the hallway, right into the path of his partner. The second gunman stumbled, holding his fire to avoid hitting his teammate. Arthur locked the door and jammed the IV pole under the handle. It was a flimsy barricade. He turned to the soldier. The boy was still asleep, the chaos barely registering on his vitals. Arthur looked around the room. He was trapped. One door, one window facing the hallway where a gunman was waiting. No weapons. He looked at the wall outlet, the oxygen hookup. "Okay, John," he whispered to himself, using his real name for the first time in years. "Think." He grabbed the backup oxygen tank from the corner, a heavy steel cylinder. He cracked the valve open, listening to the hiss of pure O2. He ripped the power cord from the television on the wall, stripping the wires with his teeth until the copper was exposed. "Open the door!" the gunman outside shouted, kicking the wood. The IV pole bent. Arthur dragged the heavy crash cart in front of the door. He positioned the oxygen tank so the nozzle was facing the door gap. He looked at the soldier. "I'm sorry about the noise, kid." Arthur held the stripped wires near the outlet. He waited. Kick. The door buckled. Kick. The IV pole snapped. The door flew open. The gunman stood there, weapon raised. Arthur cranked the oxygen valve to maximum. A jet of invisible, highly flammable gas sprayed directly at the gunman in the doorway. "Flash out," Arthur yelled, diving behind the soldier's bed. He touched the two exposed wires together. Sparks. The oxygen stream caught the spark. Fum. It wasn't an explosion, but a deflagration of violent, instantaneous fireball that consumed the oxygen in the doorway. The gunman screamed as the concussive wave of heat threw him backward into the hallway. His suit jacket smoking, the fire suppression system triggered instantly, drenching the hallway in water and chemical foam. Arthur coughed, waving away the smoke. The doorway was black and charred. The gunman was groaning on the floor outside, incapacitated. Arthur stood up. He checked the soldier's pulse. Steady, he walked to the shattered window and looked out. The nurses were cowering under the desk. Walsh was curled up in a fetal position in the corner. Arthur stepped out of the room, wet from the sprinklers, his blue jumpsuit clinging to his frame. He picked up the subcompact machine gun the first assassin had dropped. He ejected the magazine, checked the chamber, and clicked it back in. He walked over to Dr. Walsh. Walsh looked up, trembling, water dripping from his nose. He saw the gun in the janitor's hand. "Please," Walsh whimpered, "don't kill me." Arthur looked down at the man who had treated him like dirt for 3 years. "Check the patient in 404, Arthur said, his voice cold iron. "His heart rate is elevated. And, doctor, yes, if you let anyone else into that room before the state police arrive, I will come back, and I won't be bringing a mop." Arthur turned to the elevators. He couldn't stay. The police were coming, and he was still a fugitive. He had exposed himself. The facial recognition cameras would have him flagged by now. The elevator doors opened. Susanna Horton was standing there. She hadn't left. "I told you to go," Arthur said, lowering the gun. "I called them," Susanna said, holding up her phone. "Not the police. I called the news. Channel 5, CNN, Fox. I told them there was a terrorist attack at Mercy General and that a hero surgeon was holding hostages." Arthur stared at her. "You did what?" "They're outside, Arthur," she said, stepping out of the elevator. 5 satellite trucks. Live feeds. If you walk out there, the whole world sees you. The government can't disappear a man who is live on national television. Arthur looked at the gun in his hand, then at Susanna. She was shaking, but she was smiling. "It's the only way you survive," she whispered. "Come into the light." Arthur dropped the magazine from the gun and placed the weapon on the floor. He smoothed back his wet grey hair. "You're a hell of a nurse, Susanna," he said. "And you're a terrible janitor," she replied. Together they walked toward the lobby, where the flashing lights of the world were waiting to turn the ghost back into a man. The lobby of Mercy General Hospital had transformed into a blinding arena of red and blue strobes. Through the revolving glass doors, Arthur Banks saw the blockade. Chicago police barricades holding back a sea of media vans, while behind the perimeter, black SUVs with tinted windows idled like sharks. "They'll shoot you the moment you step out," Susanna whispered, gripping his arm. "They'll say you were armed. They'll say you were a threat." Arthur looked at the elevator where he had abandoned the machine gun. "Then I walk out with nothing, open palms." "It won't matter," Susanna said, her voice trembling but her eyes fierce. "Those contractors, they can't let you speak. You know what you saw in the Coringo Valley. That's why you ran. You have the flight logs proving they ordered a strike on a civilian hospital to kill one target." "If I stay, they storm the building," Arthur replied, his face set in grim determination. "I won't let this hospital become a battlefield." "You're not going alone." Susanna pulled out her phone, hitting Go Live on Facebook. "I'm your shield. They won't shoot a nurse on a live stream." Before Arthur could stop her, the automatic doors hissed open. The cold night air hit them like a physical blow, carrying a wall of noise megaphones, shouting reporters, and the thumping rotor of a news helicopter. "Drop the WAPON! Get on the ground!" a SWAT officer screamed. "Here's Unahmed!" Susanna yelled back, throwing her arms wide, placing her body directly between Arthur and the police line. "He's of Dorsetter. He's saved a satyr Zeth. Hazay steered's life." A red laser dot danced on Arthur's forehead, then slid down to Susanna's chest. High atop the parking garage, a sniper adjusted his scope. He wasn't police, he was a private contractor. His earpiece crackled. "Target is hostile. He has a hostage. I don't have a clear shot. The female is blocking," the sniper whispered. "Shoot through the hostage," the voice in his ear ordered. "Do it. Now." Arthur saw the glint on the roof. He knew the protocol. He grabbed Susanna's waist, ready to throw her to the ground and take the bullet. Scrake! A massive, up-armored Humvee smashed through the wooden police barricades, sending debris flying. It roared up the hospital driveway, mounting the curb and slamming to a halt directly between Arthur and the sniper's line of sight. The doors flew open. Colonel James Rhodes stepped out, not with a pistol, but with a megaphone. Behind him, a squad of U.S. Army Rangers deployed, weapons raised, not at Arthur, but at the black SUVs and the roof. "Seize! Fire!" Rhodes bellowed. "This is a federal military operation. Ain 1 files. Trust will be eager-jed by wide. Set your special forces." The police lowered their guns in confusion. The men in the black suits froze. Rhodes looked at the red dot still wavering on the Humvee arm. Sergeant Puckett, the red dot still wavering on the Humvee's armor. He tapped his headset, looking directly at the roof. "Sergeant, if that laser doesn't disappear in 2 seconds, drop the building on him." The red dot vanished instantly. Rhodes turned to Arthur, a grim smile touching his lips. "You really know how to make an exit, Major?" Arthur straightened his spine. The janitor was gone. Colonel, I believe you have a soldier of mine upstairs, Private O'Connor." "He's secure," Rhodes confirmed. "My men have the ICU locked down. The cleaners are being arrested as we speak." He gestured to the wall of news cameras. "You have an audience, John. The whole world is watching. Do you want to disappear again? Or do you want to finish what you started 4 years ago?" Arthur looked at the cameras. He looked at Susanna, who was trembling but smiling. He walked past Rhodes right up to the police line where a dozen microphones were thrust into his face. "My name," Arthur said, his voice booming into the night, "is Major John Galloway, United States Army Medical Corps. 4 years ago I was declared dead to cover up a war crime. Tonight I performed emergency surgery on Private Michael O'Connor to save him from the same people who tried to silence me. I am surrendering to the Chicago Police Department. Provided that Senator Thomas Graham takes my deposition personally." The flashbulbs erupted like a supernova, turning the night into day. 6 months later, the hearing had been the most watched event on C-SPAN in a decade. Senator Graham used Arthur's evidence to dismantle Aegis Global, handing down dozens of indictments. The accident that had killed the real Arthur Banks was reinvestigated, and John Galloway's name was cleared. Dr. Preston Walsh sat in a cramped office in a strip mall clinic in Gary, Indiana. He stared at a medical journal cover featuring a man in a suit shaking hands with the president. The headline read, "Medal of Freedom awarded to the surgeon of the shadows." Walsh threw the magazine into the trash, the bitterness of his revoked license still fresh. Back in Chicago, the sun shone on the newly dedicated O'Connor Trauma Center at Mercy General. Susanna Horton stood at the podium, her ID badge now reading, "Charge Nurse." In the front row sat Michael O'Connor, leaning on a cane, alive and smiling. "And now," Susanna announced, "I would like to introduce the new chief of trauma surgery." The applause was polite, expecting a board-certified transfer from Harvard. A man walked onto the stage. He wore a crisp white coat embroidered with Dr. John Galloway, M.D. He was clean-shaven, looking 10 years younger, though his eyes still held the quiet weight of experience. He stepped to the podium. "Thank you," John said. His voice was no longer a raspy whisper. It was the calm, steady voice of a healer. He looked at the doctors in the crowd, the ones who had ignored him, the ones who had walked over him when he was mopping their spills. He didn't look angry. He looked at peace. "Medicine," John began, "is not about the uniform you wear. It is not about the title on your badge. It is about the hands, and what those hands are willing to do when the lights go out and nobody is watching." He looked down at Michael O'Connor. The soldier gave him a thumbs up. "I spent 3 years learning the most important lesson of my life in these hallways," John continued. "I learned that the person emptying the trash might be the only one who notices the patient is crashing. I learned that every single person in this building matters." He paused, his eyes finding Susanna's. "I used to clean the floors," John said, a genuine smile breaking through. Now I'm just trying to keep my hands clean enough for the next shift. The applause didn't just ripple, it roared. It was a standing ovation that washed over him, cleansing the years of dirt and hiding. John Galloway walked off the stage, hand in hand with Susanna. They exited out the back, into the quiet hospital garden. "So," Susanna said, bumping his shoulder. "Chief of surgery." "Big raise, huge," John agreed. "Does this mean you're going to hire a better janitor?" John laughed, a real, full-bellied sound that felt like freedom. "No. I think I'll keep the current staff. I might even give them a raise. You never know which one of them might be a retired astronaut hiding from NASA." They walked together toward the parking lot, leaving the ghosts behind them, stepping finally and fully into the light. We often judge people by their station in life, forgetting that everyone has a history we cannot see. Arthur Banks was a ghost in the machine, a hero disguised as a nobody, proving that true skill and honor don't need a title to shine. He risked his freedom and his life to save a stranger, reminding us that doing the right thing is always worth the cost. What would you have done? Would you have stayed hidden to save yourself, or would you have picked up that needle? If you enjoyed this story of hidden heroes and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Share this video with a friend who loves a good drama. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. See you in the next one.